The machine looked deceptively simple, about the size of a portable typewriter encased in wooden boxing, with a keyboard and a set of illuminating lamp letters arranged above it. When a German operator pressed a key, electrical current flowed through a labyrinth of wiring, rotors, and a plug board before lighting up an entirely different letter on the display. Press the same key again, and a completely different letter would illuminate. This was the Enigma, and in 1926, the German Navy became the first branch of their military to adopt it for operational communications. The concept behind Enigma actually predated German military interest. Arthur Scherbius, a German engineer, had patented the original design back in 1918, initially marketing it to commercial businesses seeking secure communications. Banks showed mild interest. Diplomatic services gave it a glance. But it was the German armed forces who recognized its true potential for military secrecy. By 1928, the German army had followed the Navy's lead, and by the early 1930s, Enigma machines were being manufactured in their thousands. Here is what made the device seem utterly unbreakable. The machine contained 3 rotors. Later models would use 4, each with 26 positions representing every letter of the alphabet. When you typed a letter, the right-hand rotor would advance 1 position, like an odometer clicking forward. After 26 key presses, it would trigger the middle rotor to advance, and so on. But that was merely the beginning. At the front of the machine sat a plug board where operators could swap pairs of letters using cables. A typical setup might swap 10 pairs, meaning 20 letters would be substituted before the signal even reached the rotors. The mathematics were genuinely staggering. Cryptographers calculated that the 3-rotor Enigma with a 10-pair plugboard arrangement offered approximately 158 million possible starting configurations. That is a 1 followed by 20 digits. To put this into human terms, if you had 1,000 people testing one configuration every second, working day and night without pause, they would need longer than the age of the universe to try them all. German military leadership understood these numbers. They were not fools. Their cryptographic experts had done the calculations and concluded, quite reasonably by the standards of the era, that no enemy could possibly test enough combinations to find the correct daily settings before those settings changed at midnight. They called it unbreakable and genuinely believed it. This confidence shaped German military communications throughout the 1930s. Radio operators transmitted orders with increasing boldness. Naval commanders coordinated U-boat wolf packs across the Atlantic. Luftwaffe squadrons received targeting instructions. The entire German war machine would come to depend on Enigma's presumed invulnerability. What the Germans failed to appreciate, and this would prove their undoing, was that mathematics could be fought with mathematics. The astronomical number of combinations was only insurmountable if you approached the problem through brute force, testing each possibility one by one. But what if you could find shortcuts? What if you could identify patterns, exploit procedural weaknesses, or build machines that could eliminate millions of impossible combinations in moments? Several nations would attempt exactly this. Polish mathematicians working in a basement in Warsaw. French intelligence officers cultivating spies inside Germany. American codebreakers developing their own techniques. But it would be Britain, specifically, a peculiar collection of academics, chess champions, linguists, and crossword enthusiasts gathered at a Victorian mansion in Buckinghamshire, who would ultimately transform Enigma from Germany's greatest asset into their most catastrophic liability. The story of how that happened does not begin in Britain, however. It begins in Poland, with 3 young mathematicians who saw something in Enigma that established cryptographers had dismissed, and who would lay the foundations for everything that followed. In 1929, something unusual happened at the University of Poznan. The German military had been transmitting Enigma encrypted messages for several years, and Polish intelligence had been intercepting every single one without understanding a word. Traditional code breakers, linguists, classicists, specialists in language patterns had achieved nothing. So Poland tried something radical. They recruited mathematicians. Marian Rejewski was 23 years old when Polish intelligence approached him. He had studied mathematics at Poznan and later at Göttingen in Germany, giving him both technical brilliance and fluency in German. Alongside him came two colleagues, Jerzy Różycki, barely 21, and Henryk Zygalski, the same age. None of them had any background in cryptography. This, as it turned out, was precisely their advantage. Traditional code breakers looked at encrypted messages and searched for linguistic patterns, repeated phrases, common words, letter frequencies, but Enigma scrambled letters so thoroughly that these techniques were useless. Rejewski approached the problem differently. He ignored the messages entirely and focused instead on the machine itself. Enigma was a mathematical system. Therefore, mathematics could unpick it. Working in the Cipher Bureau's offices in Warsaw, Rejewski began analyzing the structure of Enigma's encryption. He knew the machine used rotors, but he did not know their internal wiring, which letter connected to which. This seemed like an impossible barrier. Then, in 1931, an extraordinary stroke of fortune arrived. Hans Thilo Schmidt was a disgruntled German civil servant working in the Cipher office in Berlin. Passed over for promotion, resentful of his more successful brother, who was rising through military ranks, Schmidt decided to sell secrets. He approached French intelligence, who gave him the code name Ash, and over subsequent years he delivered photographs of Enigma, operating manuals, monthly key tables, and crucially, technical documents describing the machine's construction. French intelligence, however, did not know what to do with this material. Their own code breakers examined Schmidt's documents and concluded that even with this information, breaking Enigma remained mathematically impossible. Rather than filing the material away, France shared it with their Polish allies. It was an act of generosity that would change history, though the French did not realize it at the time. When Rejewski received Schmidt's documents in December 1932, everything changed. The technical specifications allowed him to construct mathematical equations describing Enigma's encryption process. Using group theory and permutation mathematics, he worked backwards from intercepted messages to deduce the internal wiring of the rotors. By the end of 1932, within just a few weeks of receiving the French material, Rejewski had reconstructed the Enigma machine entirely through pure mathematics. But reconstructing the machine was only half the battle. The Germans changed their settings daily, which rotors to use, their starting positions, the plugboard connections. Polish intelligence needed to find each day's settings quickly enough to read that day's messages. Rejewski's solution was the Bombe, a mechanical device that could test rotor combinations automatically. By 1938, the Poles had 6 bombers running, and they were reading German military traffic regularly. Then disaster struck. In December 1938, Germany upgraded their Enigma machines from 3 rotors to 5, with operators choosing any 3 from the set of 5. The number of possible combinations increased tenfold overnight. Poland's resources were simply too limited to build enough bombers to cope. On the 25th of July, 1939, just 5 weeks before Germany invaded Poland, Polish intelligence summoned British and French representatives to a secret meeting in the Kabaki Woods near Warsaw. There they handed over everything: reconstructed Enigma machines, technical documents, the Bombe designs, years of accumulated knowledge. The British representatives were stunned. They had believed Enigma unbreakable. Poland had been reading it for 7 years. The French should have cracked Enigma first. They had every advantage. Hans Thilo Schmidt had been their spy, delivering his secrets to French handlers in grand hotels across Belgium and Switzerland. The documents flowed for years, cipher keys, operating procedures, technical manuals, all passing through French hands before reaching Poland. Yet France squandered perhaps the greatest intelligence opportunity of the interwar period. The problem was institutional. French military intelligence, the 12e Bureau, maintained a strict separation between human intelligence operations and cryptanalysis. The spy masters who ran Schmidt had little communication with the codebreakers who might have used his material. When French cryptographers did examine the Enigma documents, they applied traditional techniques and reached traditional conclusions. The mathematics were impossible. Captain Gustave Bertrand, the French intelligence officer who handled the Schmidt relationship, recognized that his own country's code breakers were failing. Rather than force interdepartmental cooperation, he simply passed the material to Poland under existing intelligence sharing agreements. It was an admission of defeat disguised as Allied generosity. France had the gold, but lacked the miners to extract it. Schmidt continued providing intelligence throughout the 1930s. He attended a meeting with Bertrand in Switzerland as late as 1938, delivering updated key tables and procedures. French intelligence paid him handsomely, the equivalent of hundreds of thousands in today's currency, but never developed the capability to use his information independently. They remained entirely dependent on Polish analysis. When war erupted in September 1939, French code-breaking efforts were scattered and underfunded. The Service de Renseignement had small sections working on German communications, but nothing approaching the systematic mathematical attack the Poles had developed. France had perhaps a dozen people working on Enigma. Britain, by comparison, was already expanding to hundreds. There was also a deeper strategic miscalculation. French military doctrine in the 1930s rested on defensive assumptions. The Maginot Line would hold. Any future war would resemble 1914 to 1918. Static, attritional, slow. In such a conflict, breaking enemy ciphers quickly mattered less. Messages decoded weeks or months later might still prove valuable for understanding enemy intentions over time. This thinking proved catastrophically wrong. When Germany launched Fallgelb in May 1940, the Wehrmacht moved faster than French commanders could comprehend. Panzer divisions punched through the Ardennes. Communications that might have revealed German intentions became worthless within hours. The entire French campaign lasted 6 weeks. There was no time for code breaking to matter. After the armistice, French cryptographic personnel faced impossible choices. Some fled to Britain and continued working. Others joined the Vichy government's diminished intelligence services. Captain Bertrand initially remained in unoccupied France, running a covert radio network under German noses. When the Germans occupied the entire country in November 1942, Bertrand eventually escaped to Britain, but French independent contribution to Enigma had effectively ended in June 1940. Hans Thilo Schmidt's fate was grimmer. Arrested by the Gestapo in March 1943, he was confronted with evidence of his espionage. Whether he confessed or was tortured into admission remains unclear. He died in prison that September, officially of suicide, though some historians suspect murder. The man who had given the Allies their first genuine insight into Enigma never saw the victory his betrayal helped secure. France's failure illustrates a crucial lesson. Intelligence without analytical capability is merely expensive filing. The French obtained secrets that could have won them the cryptographic war before 1939. They simply could not read what they had stolen. That reading would happen elsewhere, in a mansion 50 miles north of London, where the strangest collection of minds ever assembled for warfare was gathering. Bletchley Park was an architectural embarrassment. The mansion itself, built in varying styles by successive owners, combined Victorian Gothic with Tudor Revival and something approaching mock Renaissance. One visitor described it as a monstrous pile that no sane architect could have designed in a single sitting. This aesthetic chaos would prove oddly appropriate for the intellectual chaos about to inhabit it. The Government Code and Cipher School had operated from London since 1919, a small peacetime organisation handling diplomatic communications with modest success. By 1938, with war increasingly certain, the decision was made to relocate somewhere safer from German bombing, yet close enough to London for communication. Bletchley Park, purchased by the government for just £6,000, sat perfectly on the railway line between Oxford and Cambridge, crucial for recruiting from both universities. Commander Alastair Denniston, who headed the organisation, began assembling an extraordinary collection of minds. His recruitment methods were unconventional by military standards. He attended academic conferences. He noted who won chess championships. He monitored who completed the Daily Telegraph crossword fastest. When one newspaper ran a crossword competition in January 1942, promising a prize to anyone who completed it in under 12 minutes, several winners soon received mysterious letters inviting them to contribute to war work. The first wave of recruits arrived in August 1939, just weeks before war began. They were known internally as the Professors and included some of Britain's finest mathematical minds. Dilwyn Knox, a classical scholar who had broken codes in the previous war, led initial work on Enigma. Alan Turing, a fellow of King's College, Cambridge, already renowned for theoretical work on computation, arrived on the 4th of September, the day after Britain declared war. What made Bletchley distinctive was not merely intellectual brilliance — other nations had clever people — but the organisational willingness to harness unconventional thinking. Women were recruited in substantial numbers, eventually comprising roughly 75% of the workforce. Civilians worked alongside military personnel. Age, class, and gender mattered less than ability. A debutante might work beside a miner's daughter. A professor might report to someone half his age. The park expanded with astonishing speed. Temporary wooden huts were erected across the grounds. Each hut developed its own specialization. Hut 6 worked on German Army and Air Force Enigma. Hut 8 tackled naval Enigma. Hut 3 translated and analyzed decrypts. By 1942, over 7,000 people worked at Bletchley and its outstations. By 1944, that number exceeded 10,000. But organization alone could not break Enigma. The Polish Bombe design, delivered in July 1939, was a starting point, not a solution. German security procedures had improved. The 5-rotor system required far more processing power than Polish machines could provide, and naval Enigma, used by the U-boats devastating Atlantic convoys, employed additional complications that made it significantly harder than Army or Air Force versions. What Bletchley needed was industrial-scale code-breaking, machines that could run continuously, testing thousands of rotor positions daily, operated by shifts of workers around the clock. This required engineering capability that Poland, for all their mathematical brilliance, had never possessed. British manufacturing, still formidable despite the war, would build what theory demanded. Turing had arrived at Bletchley with ideas already forming. During his time at Cambridge and Princeton, He had developed theoretical frameworks for mechanical computation that would eventually underpin modern computing. Now he would apply that thinking to a practical problem of immediate wartime urgency. The result would be a machine that took the Polish Bombe concept and transformed it into something altogether more powerful. Alan Turing understood something fundamental about Enigma that others had missed. The machine's astronomical number of combinations only mattered if each combination was equally likely to be correct. But they were not. German operators followed procedures. They made predictable choices. They repeated phrases. And Enigma itself had an inbuilt weakness. A letter could never encrypt to itself. Press the letter A, and any letter might illuminate except A. This seemingly minor design feature would prove catastrophic for German security. Turing designed the British bombe around this vulnerability. If codebreakers could guess that a message contained a specific phrase, and German military communications were full of predictable phrases like weather report, or nothing to report, or Heil Hitler, they could test where in the encrypted message that phrase might appear. Any position where a letter would have to encrypt to itself could be immediately eliminated. This was the crib technique, and it slashed the number of possible combinations from millions to thousands. The first British bombe, named Victory, was installed at Bletchley Park on the 18th of March 1940. It was an imposing device, standing over 6 feet tall, containing 36 rotating drum units that simulated Enigma rotors spinning through combinations. Wires at the rear could be reconfigured to test different crib assumptions. When the drums stopped rotating, operators checked whether the indicated settings produced sensible German text. Victory worked, but it was slow. Each run could take hours, and it frequently produced false positives requiring manual checking. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Gordon Welchman, a mathematician working in Hut 6, realized that the plugboard connections could be exploited more efficiently. His diagonal board enhancement, added to subsequent bombes, used the logical relationships between plugboard pairs to eliminate impossible combinations automatically. A bombe equipped with Welchman's diagonal board could find daily settings in minutes rather than hours. The British Tabulating Machine Company manufactured the improved bombes at their factory in Letchworth. Each machine cost approximately £10,000, substantial money in 1940. By the end of the war, over 200 bombes were operating continuously across Bletchley's outstations, each one testing millions of combinations daily. The manufacturing effort alone employed thousands of workers, most of whom had no idea what they were building. Production created its own challenges. The bombes were electromechanical devices with thousands of moving parts. They overheated. Contacts wore down. Drums needed precise alignment. The Women's Royal Naval Service, the Wrens, operated and maintained these machines in shifts, working in buildings that reached uncomfortable temperatures from the heat generated by constantly spinning motors. One former Wren recalled the noise as deafening, row upon row of drums clicking and whirring through the night. By 1941, the system had achieved industrial efficiency. Intercepted messages arrived from listening stations across Britain. Crib specialists identified likely phrases. Bombe operators configured their machines. When settings were discovered, teleprinters transmitted them to translation sections. Finished intelligence summaries reached military commanders within hours, sometimes minutes, of original German transmissions. The scale was unprecedented. No previous code-breaking operation in history had functioned as a continuous factory process. The Americans entering the war in December 1941 were astonished when they learned the extent of British operations. They had been working on their own Enigma efforts with a handful of people. Bletchley employed thousands, yet one critical problem remained unsolved. Naval Enigma, used by U-boats coordinating attacks on Atlantic convoys, employed procedures that made cribs much harder to obtain. Turing and his colleagues in Hut 8 were reading Army and Air Force traffic successfully. The Navy remained largely silent, and in the Atlantic, merchant ships were sinking faster than Britain could build replacements. The Battle of the Atlantic was killing Britain slowly. German U-boats, operating in coordinated wolf packs, were sinking merchant vessels faster than shipyards could replace them. In April 1941, alone, submarines sent nearly 700,000 tons of shipping to the bottom. Food supplies dwindled, fuel reserves fell. Winston Churchill later admitted that the U-boat threat was the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire war. Naval Enigma was the key, but it presented unique obstacles. The Kriegsmarine used different procedures than the Army and Luftwaffe. Their operators were better disciplined, producing fewer predictable phrases for cribs. Most critically, Naval Enigma employed a fourth rotor from February 1942 onwards, multiplying complexity by 26. Bletchley's existing bombs could not process four-rotor traffic at any useful speed. Messages that might reveal U-boat positions remained unreadable. The solution required something that mathematics alone could not provide: physical capture of German naval materials. This meant boarding enemy vessels under fire, searching for code books and rotor settings before crews could destroy them or ships sank. The risks were extraordinary. The potential rewards justified those risks. The turning point came on the 9th of May 1941. HMS Bulldog, a destroyer escorting convoy OB-318, forced U-110 to surface with depth charges. As the German submarine wallowed, taking on water, Sub-Lieutenant David Bombe led a boarding party across. Inside the cramped, oil-soaked hull, they found the Enigma machine still intact. They found the current short-signal codebook. They found bigram tables used for additional encryption. They stripped the submarine methodically whilst it slowly sank, passing materials up through the conning tower. U-110's captain, Fritz Julius Lemp, disappeared during the action, probably killed whilst attempting to swim back to his sinking vessel. His crew were taken prisoner and kept strictly isolated. The Royal Navy spread disinformation suggesting the submarine had sunk with all hands and all equipment. Germany never learned that their naval codes had been compromised. The captured materials transformed Hut 8's capabilities almost overnight. Within weeks, Bletchley was reading U-boat communications with delays of just 36 hours. Convoy routes could be adjusted to avoid Wolfpack patrol lines. Hunter-killer groups could be directed towards refueling submarines. The tonnage losses, whilst still severe, began declining. Further captures followed. In October 1942, sailors from HMS Petard boarded the sinking U-559 in the eastern Mediterranean. Lieutenant Anthony Fasson and able seaman Colin Grazier entered the flooding submarine repeatedly, passing up code books and documents until the vessel plunged beneath them. Both men drowned. Their actions provided materials that helped break the four-rotor naval enigma that had blinded Bletchley for 10 months. By mid-1943, the balance had shifted decisively. Allied forces were sinking U-boats faster than Germany could commission replacements. May 1943 became known as Black May within the Kriegsmarine. 43 submarines lost in a single month. Admiral Karl Dönitz withdrew his wolf packs from the North Atlantic, acknowledging tactical defeat. The convoys that would sustain the invasion of Europe could now cross with tolerable losses. The Germans investigated whether Enigma had been compromised. Their experts concluded that the mathematics remained sound. The British must be using direction-finding equipment, or aerial reconnaissance, or some combination of both. Security procedures were tightened. Additional codebooks were introduced, but the fundamental assumption that Enigma itself was secure was never questioned seriously. The machine that underpinned all German military communications continued operating until the final days of the war, bleeding secrets with every transmission. Britain read those secrets. They called the intelligence Ultra. Ultra was the most closely guarded secret of the entire war. The intelligence derived from Enigma decryption reached only a handful of senior commanders through heavily restricted channels. Field officers receiving Ultra-based information were often given cover stories explaining how the intelligence had been obtained through aerial reconnaissance or captured documents. Many military decisions shaped by Ultra were never credited to it, even in classified internal reports. The system worked through special liaison units, small teams of intelligence officers attached to major commands who received Ultra summaries directly from Bletchley Park. These officers briefed commanders verbally whenever possible, avoiding written records. When written summaries were necessary, they were printed on special paper that dissolved when placed in water. Commanders were forbidden from taking actions that might reveal to Germany that their communications were compromised. If Ultra revealed a convoy's location, that convoy could not simply be attacked. Alternative explanations had to exist first. A reconnaissance aircraft had to plausibly have spotted the ships. This operational security extended to extraordinary lengths. In June 1940, Ultra decrypts revealed the exact date and targets of German bombing raids against British airfields. Rather than evacuate aircraft and personnel, which would have suggested foreknowledge, Fighter Command reinforced the targets more subtly and ensured defenders were ready. The priority was protecting the source, even at cost in lives and equipment. North Africa provided the first major theatre where Ultra-shaped campaign strategy. Throughout 1941 and 1942, Bletchley decrypted communications between Rommel's Afrika Korps and Berlin. Supply convoy routes across the Mediterranean became known in advance. British submarines and aircraft intercepted fuel shipments that Rommel desperately needed. The Desert Fox blamed Italian incompetence for his logistical nightmares. He never suspected his own communications were being read in Buckinghamshire. The invasion of Sicily in July 1943 demonstrated Ultra's maturing influence. Decrypted German traffic revealed defensive dispositions across the island. Allied planners knew which beaches were heavily defended and which were lightly held. They knew the locations of reserve formations. Operation Husky achieved tactical surprise. Despite attacking an island Germany had months to fortify. D-Day planning depended on Ultra at every stage. The elaborate deception operation known as Fortitude, which convinced Germany that the main invasion would target Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy, was continuously refined, based on decrypted German intelligence assessments. When Ultra revealed that German commanders believed the fictional 1st United States Army Group was real and poised to strike Calais, Allied planners knew their deception was working. Even after the 6th of June 1944, Hitler held panzer divisions in reserve, expecting the real invasion, whilst Normandy beachheads consolidated. The Pacific Theatre benefited from parallel successes against Japanese codes. American codebreakers at Arlington Hall and Pearl Harbor broke Japanese diplomatic and military ciphers using techniques similar to those developed at Bletchley. The shooting down of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto in April 1943, his flight path revealed through decrypted communications, demonstrated that ultra-style intelligence could directly eliminate enemy leadership. Yet throughout this period, Germany never seriously considered that Enigma might be broken. Investigations after security breaches consistently concluded that procedural failures or human treachery explained intelligence leaks. The mathematical foundations remained trusted. When Admiral Dönitz questioned whether naval ciphers were compromised in late 1942, German cryptographic experts reassured him that the system was unbreakable. They were not lying. They genuinely believed it. This confidence persisted until Germany's surrender in May 1945. The ultra-secret held even longer. Former Bletchley personnel were sworn to silence. The official history of British intelligence during the war, published in 1956, made no mention of Enigma breaking. The truth only emerged publicly in 1974, nearly 30 years after victory. The question remains, why Britain? Poland had broken Enigma first. France had obtained the critical intelligence through Hans Thilo Schmidt. American codebreakers were technically capable. Germany's enemies were numerous and motivated, yet only Britain sustained and expanded the Enigma breakthrough into a war-winning intelligence operation. Understanding why reveals something profound about what large-scale code-breaking actually required. Poland deserves immense credit for the mathematical foundations. Marian Rejewski's achievement in reconstructing Enigma through pure mathematics remains one of the most brilliant cryptographic accomplishments in history. But Poland was a nation of 35 million people facing invasion by two totalitarian neighbors. The resources simply did not exist to build hundreds of bombs or employ 10,000 codebreakers. Polish mathematicians provided the spark. They could not sustain the fire. France had resources but lacked institutional coherence. The separation between intelligence gathering and cryptanalysis meant that Schmidt's documents languished without proper exploitation. French military doctrine, focused on defensive warfare, undervalued rapid signals intelligence, and the catastrophic defeat of June 1940 ended any possibility of French contribution before it could mature. Gustave Bertrand's later work in Vichy France demonstrated personal courage but could not substitute for national capability. The United States entered the war with substantial mathematical talent and industrial capacity. American codebreakers achieved remarkable successes against Japanese ciphers, most notably breaking the Purple Diplomatic Code before Pearl Harbor. But American Enigma work before December 1941 was minimal. When collaboration with Britain began seriously in 1942, the Americans wisely built upon Bletchley's existing infrastructure rather than duplicating effort. The 4-rotor bombs that eventually cracked naval Enigma were American manufactured, but they incorporated British designs and ran British procedures. Britain's advantage was cumulative. Polish foundations arrived at exactly the right moment, weeks before war began, and were immediately recognized as genuine breakthroughs rather than dismissed by institutional arrogance. Bletchley Park's organization, unconventional as it seemed, allowed brilliant individuals to collaborate without military hierarchy, stifling innovation. The recruitment of women in substantial numbers doubled the available workforce when every mind counted. Industrial capacity mattered enormously. Building 200 bombs required precision engineering at scale, manufacturing teleprinter equipment, establishing secure communications networks, constructing outstations. All this demanded resources that only major industrial nations possessed. Britain in 1940, standing alone against German-dominated Europe, somehow found capacity for this whilst simultaneously building aircraft, ships and armaments. Perhaps most critically, British operational security held. Thousands of people worked at Bletchley Park and its associated facilities. Every one of them kept the secret. Former Wrens, who had operated bombs for years, remained silent through decades of marriage, careers, and retirement. The cultural discipline required for this collective silence across class, gender, and generation was remarkable. One former codebreaker recalled attending a reunion in the 1980s where veterans finally discussed their wartime work openly for the first time. Many had never told their own families. The Enigma story offers no single hero. Rejewski's mathematics, Schmidt's treachery, Turing's machines, Welchman's improvements, the sailors who boarded sinking submarines, the wrens who operated clattering bombs through endless night shifts, all were essential. Remove any element, and the chain might have broken. Germany transmitted over 300,000 Enigma messages during the war. British codebreakers read a substantial proportion of them, sometimes within hours of transmission. This intelligence shortened the war by an estimated 2 years, according to some historians, saving countless lives on all sides. The machine that Germany trusted absolutely became instead the instrument of their undoing. Every country tried breaking Enigma. Only Britain built the combination of mathematical insight, industrial capacity, organizational flexibility, and operational security necessary to crack it and keep cracking it until the guns fell silent across Europe.